Hey everybody, welcome to the webinar. Let's give people just one more minute to join, and then we'll get rolling pretty quick here. Thank you. All right, JT, you about ready?
Yep.
All right. Hey everybody, my name is Dan Meyer. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at Versa. With me today as co-presenter is John Taylor, our Director and Principal of Security. So thank you for joining us. We're really excited to be here to talk about this topic about zero-day attacks. For our session, we want to talk about the challenges of zero-day attacks and how you can leverage a secure access service edge or SASE approach to better defend your organization. Right? SASE includes a bunch of stuff. JT is going to dig into that in some detail. A couple of quick housekeeping points. If you want to review this webinar in the future or share it with your colleagues, it'll be available on versanetworks.com website in about 24 hours. We'll also send out today's deck in email as soon as we're finished here, so stay tuned for that. If you have any questions or comments, please drop them in the questions section. We'll circle back and answer them at the end of the session as time allows. If not, we'll follow up with you in email. So once again, for those of you just joining us, welcome to this Versa Networks webinar, How to Stop Zero-Day Attacks with SASE, SSE, and Zero Trust. So with that, let's get started. We're going to go through two sections here. We're going to talk a little bit about what are zero-day attacks, and then and I'm going to take us through kind of that front end, and then we're going to talk about how we stop zero-day attacks, and that's where JT is going to take over and take us through some of the security techniques and capabilities and what you need to do to stop these attacks. But let me drop into what we want to talk about here, right? So in today's IT and OT environments, we've really evolved over the past decade, right? And attackers have adjusted their tactics along the way. These attacks have expanded from just focusing on servers to web apps to web browsers, and along the way, attackers have really evolved as well, right? Initially, they were individuals motivated by curiosity, but they've evolved to be well-funded criminal organizations that are looking for profit, as well as state actors that are looking for intelligence or sabotage or influence. And so, unfortunately, enterprises have struggled to keep pace with all of these threats and these evolutions. And many organizations continue to use dated products and methods to try and thwart attacks, zero-day attacks being some of the most difficult. So let's drill down into some of these aspects of what a zero-day attack is, so we can kind of define our terms here. Whoops. So zero-day attacks are actually a combination of two different things, right? A zero-day vulnerability and a zero-day exploit. Right? The zero-day vulnerability, it's an undisclosed or undiscovered hole in a computer application like a browser or operating system. The undisclosed part means that the vendor either doesn't know about it or has not had time to issue a patch to fix it. Right? And this is where the threat comes in, because if attackers find that vulnerability before the vendor does, they can create an exploit to take advantage of it, potentially. Right? An exploit is code that attackers use to take advantage of a zero-day vulnerability, and the exploit will allow the attackers to plant a virus, a Trojan, or some other kind of malware into the computer or device. Right? Note that the term zero-day means the number of days that a vendor has known about a specific vulnerability. Right? It's important because it takes time to develop a patch, develop a test and deploy a patch for a vulnerability. Right? And so why is that time frame important? Well, let's take a look at what the lifecycle of a vulnerability, of a zero-day vulnerability looks like. So first, a vulnerability is discovered in the wild, and someone lets the vendor know about it. The vendor develops and releases a security patch, and then you patch your systems, right? Now, during this time frame, there's a window of vulnerability during which you're open to attack by this zero-day exploit, right? This window of vulnerability when you're exposed, right? So the important question is, what happens during this vulnerability window? It often depends on who discovers the vulnerability. If it's a software vendor, then the odds are decently good that the vulnerability will be fixed before it's exploited, right? If the hackers find it first, then there is a risk that it will be exploited and used in cyber attacks, right? So let's look a little deeper at how these zero-day attacks progress. So if you take a look at, there's a number of different frameworks for how you look at the life cycle of an attack itself, right? There's a MITRE ATT&CK there's NIST cybersecurity framework, and there's the cyber kill chain, right? So cyber kill chain is what we're showing here. It's a framework developed by Lockheed Martin that outlines the stages of a cyber attack. And let's take a look at it from a zero-day attack perspective. So in terms of reconnaissance, our attackers begin with reconnaissance. They gather information about the target. In the case of zero-day attacks, the target is often a perimeter device on the edge of your network that could potentially be compromised, part of your attack surface, right? Attackers look for vulnerable systems, software versions, and potential entry points. And in this phase, it's about finding the weakest link, which in this case might be an unknown flaw in the system, right? Adversaries often use mass scanning to identify vulnerable devices all across the internet. And it's amazing. Mass scanners today can scan all 4.2 billion IP addresses on the internet in less than 5 minutes. And so what we've seen is, especially for zero-day attacks, there's a lot of mass scanning and mass compromising that is attempted to happen here, right? And so it's happening at machine scale, at internet scale. Weaponization is the next step. And once a potential zero-day vulnerability is identified, the attacker creates a malicious exploit. It could be malware or a script designed to specifically leverage this unseen flaw, right? Then delivery. The third step is delivery. The attacker now sends this weaponized content to the target, right? It could be through some remote procedure call, API calls, compromised websites, or some other method, right? And the goal is to make the target interact with this malicious payload, triggering the exploit. Now, the exploitation itself, once delivered, the exploit is activated, taking advantage of this unknown vulnerability. It may be, buffer overflow. It may be something else. I don't know, right? Like, these things vary significantly, but it executes the malicious code on the victim system. And this is the critical moment where the system's defenses are bypassed. Installation then happens where with the exploit successful, the attacker now moves to installation. Malicious code establishes itself with a foothold in the system, often installing additional malware to ensure persistent access or compromising further systems, right? And then there's the follow-on steps: command and control, right? The compromised system connects to an external command and control server. This allows the attacker to remotely direct the malware, gather data, move laterally, maybe download further malware, and the attacker now has a foothold within the organization. And then finally, action on objectives, where the attacker can now execute on the ultimate goal, whether it's data exfiltration, deploying ransomware, or establishing some kind of long-term presence within the network, right? So the reason I'm taking time to walk through each of these steps in the cyber kill chain is that each of these steps also represents an opportunity to stop a zero-day attack. And this is where the title of our session comes in. SASE provides a broad and deep capability to disrupt zero-day attacks across many of these different stages of the cyber kill chain for a zero-day attack, right? Now, JT is going to take us through these as soon as I hand off to him. So let me get through a couple more thoughts here, and then we'll let JT kind of talk about some of the meat. One of the things to take a look at is, how prevalent is this, right? Zero-day attacks, they exploit vulnerabilities. So how frequently are exploits utilized in cyber attacks? Ianti had developed some research on this last year in their M-Trends report, right? They noted that exploits continue to be the most leveraged initial infection vector used by adversaries, right? And they state perimeter devices that are accessible via the internet, including firewalls, virtualization solutions, and virtual private network devices, continue to be highly sought after targets for attackers, right? Think about that, right? This is your attack surface, and that's the part, vulnerabilities in that attack surface are really where these guys are going after, and zero-day vulnerabilities really open up that attack surface. That said, there's an important caveat to this point, right? Not all exploits are 0 days. Many of the vulnerabilities that adversaries exploit are existing and known vulnerabilities that just haven't been patched yet. So JT is going to get into this more when he talks about some best practices for stopping 0-day attacks, but one item is clear: a robust patching program is really critical to the security of your organization, right? So let's dig in and identify, what is getting exploited. One thing I wanted to share here is the CISA KEV, right? Back in the fall of 2022, CISA created a catalog called KEV. It stands for Known Exploited Vulnerabilities. And why did they need to do this? Well, if you look at this funnel, right, prior to KEV, NIST is managing the National Vulnerabilities Database. Today, it has over 200,000 vulnerabilities listed, right? This is way too many for any IT organization to track and manage, right? And many of these vulnerabilities have been fixed or patched, right? So the idea is, how do you help security teams figure out which vulnerabilities they really need to worry about? Logically, the most dangerous ones are those that are being actively exploited in the wild, right? So this is why CISA created the KEV list, right? Today, the KEV list has over 1,000 entries of vulnerabilities that have been exploited in the wild. About 400 of them are remotely exploitable over the internet. And I think these are the most dangerous ones, right? Things that people can reach out over the internet and exploit. Now, some of these started as 0 days and now they're just known exploits, right? Focusing on these vulnerabilities allows security teams to allocate their resources appropriately to stop the most immediate and proven threats in their networks, right? So now let's take a look at some representative vulnerabilities from this KEV list. This is a slide that some friends of mine at Gray Noise Intelligence developed a while back, and it shows the timeline of celebrity vulnerabilities, right? What's a celebrity vulnerability? It's one that gets a name, right? That gets some visibility because it's exploitable, because it's impactful, because it's a dangerous vulnerability, right? So the message here is pretty clear, right? If you look, it starts at 2014 and goes through 2022. We need to get updated data, but what this shows is that the problem is accelerating, right? In plain terms, what happens is that bad vulnerabilities are really common, right? And software keeps, these bad vulnerabilities in common software keep getting announced. The bad guys keep exploiting these vulnerabilities with some level of success, and nobody has any idea how to stop it. And so this used to happen every few years, as we can see on the left side of this graph, but now it's happening every other month, right? So let's take a look at what a 0-day attack might look like, and see if we can take some lessons from it, right? This is a timeline of the Apache Log4j vulnerability, and so let me walk you through the steps here a little bit. On December 5th, Apache identified, back in 2021, right? Apache identified this vulnerability in their widely used in Log4j logging service, right? And it enabled attackers to gain full control of affected servers by allowing unauthenticated remote code execution, right? So this is very serious, right? Log4j is heavily integrated into a really broad set of DevOps frameworks, enterprise IT systems, vendor software, cloud products. Like, it's all over the place, all over the internet. On December 6th, Apache released a patch. And the crazy thing is, everyone took that patch, reverse engineered it to figure out how the exploit worked and how to exploit the vulnerability, right? And on December 9th, weaponized proof of concepts began to be published on the internet, right? POCs, proof of concepts, are basically scripts that execute a series of steps to exploit the vulnerability. And both researchers and bad guys develop and share these on the internet. And it sets off a race to see who can exploit the vulnerability first and fastest and best. Both bad guys and then good guys trying to figure out how to patch it and understand the exploit, right? What this chart ultimately shows is that on December 10th, Gray Noise, which monitors internet noise and mass exploitation, they saw a 5x increase in the number of internet scanners scanning for remotely exploitable Log4Shell instances on the internet, right? With working exploit code in hand, the bad guys then used mass scanning to find as many vulnerable systems as possible to target and compromise, right? So this is, and so you can see everybody starting to mass scan for this vulnerability. It was a bad one, right? And the worst part is, 1 year after discovery of the Log4j flaw and the publication of the patch, 40% of Log4j downloads still remained vulnerable to the exploit. So with that, this is a first intro. Let me pass the baton to JT, who can take us through another example, and then get to the real meat of how to stop these attacks.
Thanks, Dan. Really appreciate that. So first off, guys, one of the things I want to talk about is, the recent Ivanti vulnerability. And it's not necessarily just trying to point out Ivanti, but to show a trend, right? These vulnerabilities are being targeted, right, to on-prem security equipment. And so this kind of gets a little bit into why SASE, right? Because SASE is cloud delivered, right? When it comes down to security, it's part of that SSE environment, right? And so forth. So as we see more and more of this, happening in the wild, right? We've seen it recently with Fortinet and others, right? Where, a load, right, of different vulnerabilities are now being exploited, right? And it's primarily because you, right, as a customer, have to keep this up to date. You have to maintain that. You have to keep the definitions up to date, right? This is your patch schedule going forward. And if you're on an N-X patch schedule, right, what does that really mean to you? So talking about the Ivanti vulnerability, this is was something that was a huge hit, right, in the industry, not just for the commercial side, but it was really big, right, on the federal side, right? And the reasons for that, right, is Number one, there is an on-premise appliance, right, to enable VPN because the federal government really doesn't use a lot of cloud things, right? The other thing is that because it sits behind the firewall, we have to open up multiple different inbound ports, right? So how do I track a lot of that data, right? And then, of course, what happens when that threat actor, right, tries to take over the box? It isn't about stealing credentials, right, and logging in. Hi, my name is John Taylor. My password is act123. Right. This is about how can I take control of the physical device behind that firewall because there's open ports and so forth. And how do I get that visibility? So in January of this past year, right, Ivanti actually released 4 different CVEs, right? And these were actually chained together, believe it or not, to be able to take control of the box. So, like I said, it's a little bit of an impact to the federal government, right? And what does this also mean to the commercial segment? Well, CISA actually went through and issued an emergency directive to all U.S. federal agencies to disconnect Ivanti Connect Secure and Ivanti Policy Secure products, right? And why was that? Well, I talked a little bit about how do I track it, right? How do I see certain things? Well, there was poor visibility in analytics due to it being behind a firewall, right? I can only see so much, right? The box is under attack, right? It's being exploited. It looks like valid traffic. The box wasn't patched right, accordingly. So I didn't necessarily have the visibility to understand, was that box compromised, right? There's also a rising operational overhead that comes with that, right? Once again, you're having to maintain this, you're having to upgrade this, you're always having to patch this. And as more and more of these vulnerabilities start being, released toward on-premise security equipment, this is going to change, right, how our customers actually go through and do patch management. It's going to start becoming a lot more reactive. We're going to be starting to look at more and more logs, right, at the end of the day to understand, was this, particular box or was this particular solution, compromised in some way? That's part of the standard life cycle, right? You always have to go back and do forensic analysis. It became very difficult to prevent lateral movement from this, right? Because it looked like valid traffic. The box itself was compromised, right? They were actually exfilling data. So these threat actors were getting in and using this as a jump box into the rest of the network to be able to go and grab, information, right, that was pertinent to what they wanted to grab. It's also very difficult to scale, right? Let's get down into the brass tacks of it. When you have an on-premise, security solution, you have to scale that, which means you have to not only make sure the security box is secure, but you also have to put other security in place to make sure that you can secure it from the network. So it becomes nothing more than just a big mesh, right? A bespoke network at the end of the day to be able to make this happen, which drives complexity, through the roof, right? So let's talk a little bit about how stopping zero-day attacks and where SASE really kind of comes into that, right, to help reduce a lot of that overhead and help with a lot of things that we just mentioned, right? So first off, right, what we're going to have is, as the slides aren't populating. There you go. As it disappears again. Are you seeing it, Dan?
I'm not. See if I can get there. Apparently, JT, they don't like it. It doesn't like your slide there.
Apparently, it does not.
Let's see if we can go backwards. Nope. I think you're just gonna have to skip that one.
I'll have to glaze over it then. So what I'll say is I'll go directly to what is SASE, right? And then I'll kind of talk about what's on the last slide. So there are pre-attack, right, vectors, right, and pre-attack, operations that we should be doing. And then there are day zero attack operations that we should be doing. On that pre-side, right, we should be looking at things like our next gen security solutions, things like what you see on board, right? A SASE platform, right, is potentially there. We're doing things like, consistent patching, right? We're following, our recommendations, right? We're always implementing, we're always upgrading, right? Our policies to make sure that we're trying to make sure that we're, catching the current threats and so forth. But on a day zero side, it's very reactive, right? It's an immediate patch, and hopefully there is a patch. And if it's not, it's always workarounds. We're doing things like, making configurations to live equipment, production equipment, and so forth. So that becomes a little bit hectic because you don't know if you're going to be impacting, right, at the end of the day, your users, right, or your production environment, right? So, but that gets us into what is SASE, right? So, and how does SASE make you more secure? Well, First off, SASE is a unified platform, right? So no matter where you are and what you're doing, whether you're in the office, right, utilizing secure SD-WAN, right, which gives you your routing, your on-prem firewall, your software-defined networking, right, or maybe even outside of the network, right, where I'm doing remote access, and so forth. Maybe I'm utilizing a ZTNA from a cloud solution. Maybe I'm also passing my software or my SD-WAN traffic northbound and still going through that SSE environment, right, which is the other side of what SASE is. SD-WAN is your access. SSE is your security platform in the cloud that becomes scalable for you. But either way, right, the big thing about this is that security is built right into the network from get-go. It's designed to be that way. It helps with the elimination of security gaps, right? Because now we're able to take policies and uniformly apply them, whether it be on-prem or whether it be out in the cloud, right? We get superior visibility because now I'm not having multiple different platforms. I have one platform that no matter what happens, I can always see exactly what's going on. This helps me reduce my attack surface, right? Because I'm not having the gear being on site. I'm not having, potential, threats, right, that are coming in and taking over my gear. I'm pushing that a little bit further out to the cloud, right? So therefore it can be automatically, remediated. I can continue to get my automated maintenance there, right? All, policies, and so forth are automatically just pushed to the box, right? When I talk about policies, it's more like updates, antiviral policies or antiviral definitions, right? IPS signatures and so forth. So I'm actually able to use that right from an automated perspective. So let's talk a little bit about the landscape, right, and how this actually kind of works together. So the landscape today, right, really is getting entities to resources, right? That's all we're really trying to do in the world. And today, to be able to do that, right, we have to have something like, an identity stack, a network security stack, and a traditional route switch stack, right? And your networking security stack could be firewalls, could be VPN appliances, could be anything. Your identity stack could be NAC, things like radius servers and so forth. So what Versa has been able to do, right, is take all of that together and build that into one particular platform, whether it's delivered on-prem or whether it's delivered out in the cloud, right? And so from the traditional, identity and network security, right, we're actually able to, in our operating system, right, and with one single pane of glass manager, right, be able to see and authenticate and see the logs and pass the logs and actually give something that is that would be indicator of compromise, a true positive, not a false positive or a false negative. We're actually able to parse that information and deliver that out to your SIM, right, in certain ways. And then from there, right, we actually can do the built-in routing side, as well, right? So it really kind of comes down to our security solution can also maintain or also make sure the traffic is getting from point A to point B. What's really significant, right, about that is that, we get deep traffic analytics on top of what we're normally seeing from, just the network, the next gen security platform, right? It's not just about applications. It's not just about users, right, and so forth. We get to understand where that traffic's going and how that traffic is being utilized, right? But we're also doing a little bit more with it. So we're graduating away from utilizing things like static signatures and so forth, right? We're actually putting a lot of AI, into our solution. We're actually able to make intelligent decisions, right? So we have this thing called user and entity behavior analytics, right? And this is the next gen. This is really where we can start looking at the type of traffic, what users are doing at the end of the day, and then also making sure that we're validating what the user is doing, right, is actually safe for my organization, not just looking at payloads and things like that. So let's say I'm a user, right? I'm sitting in my branch office and I'm trying to go to youtube.com, right? This is a United States destined, URL, right? So it's benign traffic. I'm just doing some streaming. The world is good. Right. But what ends up happening here is that, those VOS appliances, right, that Versa OS, whether it's in the cloud, whether it's at the branch, right, always talks right to each other, and they always talk out to the Versa analytics plane. Well, the Versa analytics plane is also teaching the UEBA solution how your traffic is working at any given point in time. And of course, this is always being logged out to your SIM solution, right? Your SOAR can take access or take action, right, based upon, what's kind of going on. If it may be quote unquote hinky, right? If you grew up in the Scooby Doo age. But if something is strange, right, we can actually take some action for this. But this traffic is, like I said, it's benign, right? I'm a user. I'm just going to youtube.com. What if I all of a sudden miskey that, right? And instead of going to youtube.com, I go to youtube.cu. Well, this is a Cuban domain, right? At the end of the day, it's still benign traffic. I'm still just trying to do some streaming, right? But I just goofed up, right? I miskeyed something. I've been with the organization, years, right? It's been learning this traffic. It knows that my user, right, goes out every day at 12 o'clock, right? Every day at 2 o'clock, right? Randomly throughout the day, however that is. But it knows I usually, surf the YouTube, right? So what ends up happening is, well, I'm still destined to Cuba, right? And I'm probably not going to get there, right, in some way, shape, or form because it's an embargoed country, right? You're realistically from the U.S. But the big thing is that it learned what I did, right? So here we go. We're talking back again to the cloud gateways. Boss is making that, sending those logs around, right? I am learning across the board. UEBA says, man, why is he going to a Cuba address, right? Something here probably needs to happen. I need to take some type of action, right? And so because it is still benign traffic, because all I'm doing is just surfing the web, right, and getting some streaming services, but because I'm going to a country, right, or I'm going to a URL that is deemed that may not be good, right, based upon my geolocation, I might look at, I still let myself go to that, but maybe I will turn around and I'll start invalidating cookies for SaaS applications I'm currently logged into. Right. I'm going to go ahead and log myself out of that because my confidence score is going to degrade, right, because of this. So I'm going to start restricting, right, and doing some dynamic segmentation and so forth, and actually kind of say, look, John's not allowed, right, to do this any longer. I can enforce more restricted access, right? So maybe I'm not allowed to get to certain inside, URLs or get the inside, resources if I'm remote doing this from a ZTNA perspective, right? I can also just maybe mirror the user's traffic at the end of the day, right? Maybe I just want to be able to get copies of it, take PCAPs and so forth, right? And then send that along, right? Send that back to the SIM or send that out to the SOC for forensic analysis, just to understand, is this a one-time thing or something like that? But it gives you a lot of different controls, right, that you can put in from a predictive side, right, utilizing that AI. So kind of bringing it all together, right? What is the Versa Unified SASE platform, right? We talked about what is SASE versus Unified, right? Because it's one operating system that's put everywhere. This gives you the ability to have ZTNA, right, or SWG-based services. This gives you the ability to have, CASB and DLP along with the ATP side, right? So we're doing sandboxing, right? We can help find 0 days specifically through detonation of files and so forth. That UEBA that we just talked about, looking at the traffic type and where I may be going. Could that be an IOC, right? Could that actually be something that is malicious? Do I want to start restricting traffic, right, while I grab that forensic evidence? Absolutely, I would. We can do that directly from the WAN as well, right, with our secure SD-WAN. And just to kind of put it out there too, right, because of the way Versa is expanding, we can now bring this even into the LAN, right? We can do this directly at the switch port. So you can have a feathered security defense, right, from a unified SASE perspective, all the way from the switch port, all the way through the cloud, right? And one of the things I'll kind of leave you guys with, right, is, the Versa does have a vision, right? It is zero trust everywhere. Everything that we do, right, really does apply to a zero trust principle, least privileged access, right, and so forth. So there is a QR code down here at the bottom. Please hit that QR code. Go take a look at our zero trust everywhere. From there, it will span you into what we do from SSE, what we do from unified SASE, secure SD-WAN, secure SD-LAN. All of that stuff is there. But it does kind of give you that high level, right, of what Versa's vision is and what it actually looks like, right, if you double down and if you do consume the entire Versa platform. With that, Dan, I'll give it back to you for any closing remarks as we have about 30 seconds left on the webinar.
Yeah, thanks, JT, and thanks for taking us through that. Listen, there's a number of questions here. Viraj, Ron, Muhammad, we've seen your questions. I don't think we have time, unfortunately, to hit them. We will follow up with you guys offline and get your questions answered. But there's some interesting questions about how does SASE protect multi-clouds, right? Does SASE include DDoS? What about RBI? What kind of POP coverage does Versa have? We'll get to those answers offline for everybody. But I think just to sum it up, I just want to thank you all for showing up. Hopefully you learned something, and we'll circle back with you with this recording and video and email, and love to chat with you more if you have some deeper questions. All right, JT, any final remarks?
I'm good on my side. I just want to say thanks for everybody for joining us today. Like, looking forward to the next presentation. And once again, like Dan said, we will definitely be following up with emails, right, to all of your questions.
Sure. Thank you.